Hi guys, this is Cathy here. I've been asked by Nathan this week to do a presentation on Patricia Highsmith's Strangers on a Train. So I thought, just to change things up a little, and given that we are in lockdown, it might be interesting to do an old school presentation. So that's what I've done for you today. Basically, I won't be reading from the presentation as such. This is just literally a few whistle-stop overviews of what I've written, of which you will have a full copy to read in more detail. So it's just a few bullet points on the presentation, just to give it a little bit of context. So, without further ado, welcome to Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. Just a quick overview of what I plan to cover in this presentation and how it's going to be laid out. Who was Patricia Highsmith? What kind of lady was she? What kind of writer was she? What was she influenced by? And what were her feelings about what she wrote at the time? Then we'll have a look at Strangers on the Train, the novel. What was the novel about? What was it saying? How did it sit in the context of the time in which it was written? Then we'll have a brief look at the characters, of which there were two, and we will discuss those in more detail. Then I'd like to have a look at the themes of the novel. What was being said in this novel? What point was she trying to make in writing it in the first place? Then I've posed some questions for you at the end for you to consider, and that we can talk about more in the discussion board later. So, Patricia Highsmith. Who was this lady? She was described by many as a loner and an alcoholic who preferred the company of cats to humans. She once said, "I choose to live alone because my imagination functions better when I don't have to speak to people." She famously arrived at a cocktail party carrying a cabbage and some snails in a large bag, claiming that she'd brought her own superior company for entertainment and to engage with for the evening. She was a lesbian who preferred the intellectual company of men, and who described herself as a lesbian with a misogynistic streak. A colleague described her as plain-spoken, dry, funny, and great fun to be around. Another, Otto Penzler, an American publisher, commented after her death that she was mean, cruel, hard, unlovable. "I could never penetrate how any human being could be that relentlessly ugly. But her books, brilliant." Highsmith had strong political views and was critical of America's 20th century culture and foreign policies. Like many writers at the time, she was a member of Amnesty International and publicly voiced her opinions on her opposition to the displacement of Palestinians. Here I have written some of the words that were used to describe Patricia: depressed, a loner, anorexic, an alcoholic, but equally mischievous, quirky, funny, very talented. I think she's the kind of woman I would have liked to have met down the pub and had a few beers with. I think she was a woman ahead of her time, and I think she had a strong voice and she wasn't afraid to use it. A little more about Patricia, and I'm sure you'll be intrigued as to why we're now looking at cats. That's a reference back to the fact that she found them much easier to be around than human beings. Patricia was born in 1921 to parents who split before she was born. She lived her early years in New York before being moved to Fort Worth at the age of 12 to live with her grandmother. She gets the name Highsmith from her adoptive stepfather. Highsmith studied English composition and playwriting at Barnard College. Whilst at the Yaddo Artist Retreat, she wrote Strangers on a Train, her first novel, which went on to be published in 1950 with modest success. In 1951, Strangers on a Train was adapted for a film directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and this launched her career as a highly regarded crime writer. Highsmith was best known for her psychological thrillers about a charming, charismatic criminal, Tom Ripley, about whom she wrote a highly acclaimed series of novels. She wrote 22 novels and many short stories during her long career. She died at the age of 74 in Switzerland, leaving her wealth to the Yaddo colony. Let's have a look at a whistle-stop view of Strangers on a Train. Basically, the story is that two strangers, Guy Hames, an architect, and Charles Bruno, a playboy, meet on a train and strike up a conversation. It's established that each has someone in their life who they'd prefer was dead. Guy would like to rid himself of his unfaithful wife, Miriam. Bruno would like to be free of his controlling father. Bruno suggests a pact where they each kill for the other, and in so doing leave police baffled and without motives for the respective murders. Guy does not wholeheartedly believe Bruno is serious. Whilst Guy is in Mexico, however, Bruno kills Miriam. Bruno, having honoured his side of the deal, relentlessly pursues Guy and guilt trips him into killing his father. Guy finally weakens and commits a murder that he doesn't really want to commit. A detective becomes suspicious, but Bruno drowns after falling from a boat despite Guy's attempts to save him. This closes the case on the murders. Guy confesses his part of the murders as he is racked with guilt, and this is overheard by the detective. Guy subsequently comes clean at the end of the book, as the guilt is just too much for him to live with. So, Strangers on the Train, the movie by Alfred Hitchcock. It made Patricia Highsmith a writer that was launched into a totally different stratosphere just by virtue of the film. The film itself, like the book, asked difficult questions regarding the social norms at the time. It talked about uncomfortable topics like murder, the role of women in society. It had a homosexual undertone. It questioned morality. It challenged the criminal justice system, and it looked at culpability in the commission of crime. The main characters of Strangers on a Train, as we've mentioned earlier, were Guy Hames and Charles Bruno. There are other bit part characters, but these were the two. Guy, an architect who was middle class, educated, well turned out. He has a moral compass and a conscience. He plays a more protagonist role in the book. He reluctantly murders Bruno's father after being strong-armed by Bruno. Charles Bruno is cold-blooded, hapless and a spoilt playboy who has no moral values and no conscience to speak of. He plays a more antagonistic role in the book and murders Guy's wife in cold blood with no sense of wrongdoing whatsoever. So what are the themes of the book? Guilt. Guilt runs through the book as a central defining theme. Highsmith uses the vehicle of guilt as a means of asking the reader to consider culpability in a case of murder. If the murderer feels guilt, is he less guilty than a murderer who feels no remorse at all? Obsession. The obsessive behaviour of Bruno and his relentless pursuit of Guy is central to the reason that Guy goes ahead with his side of the pact and eventually kills Bruno's father. Homosexuality. Highsmith hides an undertone of homosexual tension in the subtext. It's less open and upfront than in the storylines of her later books. Bruno displays desire for Guy in his relentless need to pursue his company and his affections. You don't turn me into Metcalfe because you like me, Guy. You like me in a way. So my questions. Highsmith used sexuality, especially homosexuality, as a theme in many of the later books. I think it could be argued that the gay subtext sits subtly within this book, and I suggest it could be argued that homosexuality